Reign of Reza Shah came with a few serious implementations and changes compared to the Qajar dynasty that ruled before them. Reza Shah, for instance, withdrew the semi-autonomous status of regions such as Azerbaijan, Arabistan, or Al-Ahwaz, and Kurdistan, and embarked on a program of actually a cultural genocide. And this was to almost eradicate non-Persian languages and establish an Iran in which everyone spoke only Farsi. To achieve this goal, he made Farsi the only legitimate language. And it's not only the usage of other minority languages that were banned in Iran, but also their usage was criminalized and they were punishable. Reza Shah was going on this process of nation building and really focused on two concepts, two false, actually, understandings of concepts called modernization and civilization throughout his nation building. And that's why the languages other than Farsi was banned, was criminalized. He also created a centralized bureaucracy. So any sort of minimal power or self-determination that these smaller semi-autonomous regions had, such as Azerbaijan, were all revoked. Everything had to go through this centralized government process. Traditionally, he also outlawed the traditional dress, and actually probably one of the worst fates that one of the communities within the geographic region of Iran began facing was by the nomadic tribes. They not only had their clothing and culture and language stolen from them, but they also faced unlawful execution. They were killed simply for the way of their life, simply because it did not fit into this picture of modern and civilized society when for hundreds of years, if not thousands, their way of life was nomadic. Reza Shah also began suppressing any sort of rebellions against the central government. One of the good examples that we can think about this was from Azerbaijan itself, which is the movement of Sheikh Mohammed Khiabani, who was working towards Azadistan, or free land for Azerbaijan to obtain its own rightful status under human rights. And this was definitely one of the brutal suppressions that we see. He was hung, he was killed at the end of rebellion. Which I don't even know if the word rebellion is correct here to use, because his movement was a social movement. He wanted the promised human rights for his people and for the region, for his people to be able to speak in their own language, to be able to practice their own culture and wear their own clothes, and listen to their own music and have publications in their own language. All of this, of course, brought forward the Islamic Revolution. There was a huge conservative backlash opposing this fast-paced westernization and secularization efforts that was being done by the Western-backed Shah. In addition to mountain economic difficulties, Reza Shah, in addition to being a horrible leader in terms of suppressing cultural rights, language rights, and minority rights in a lot of different ways, him and his regime also was not very good with economics, with financial aspect of ruling a government. This created a serious inflation that was faced by the people of Iran. Another factor behind this Islamic revolution was that Reza Shah Pahlavi was very oppressive, and he used Savak, which directly worked for the central government and for the Shah himself. These are, American trade secret police, and they went on a mass murder rant. They tortured people. They imprisoned basically anyone who was against Pahlavi's government. Overall, Reza Shah was not a good leader. He was horrible with social issues, and he was horrible with economics, which stole people's livelihood, which stole food, actually, and the food from people's table, and the shelter that they had. So at the time, people had every reason to want a revolution, to want a difference to be made in that geographic region. And given that Reza Shah was doing this very fast-paced modernization, that people weren't socially, ideologically, or even economically, as we spoke, ready for it, it led to an opposition of this Western-based modernization, which would be Islamic conservatives. And people were able to use this opportunity and create this revolution. And of course, Azerbaijanis, South Azerbaijanis, were a part of this. They were supportive of this. You know, Azerbaijanis had themselves just gone through a massacre in 1946 and had their government completely dismantled. Their people were raped and beheaded on the street. They were hung. You know, their books were completely burned in city centers. Their language was completely banned, and the leader, Jafar Pishaveri, who created this who attempted to actually create this autonomous government, a national government in Azerbaijan, was murdered. That national government lasted for a very fruitful year. I must say that during his time, you know, he was very egalitarian. He did amazing reformist land reforms. You know, he distributed land equally among its people. Maybe equally is not the correct word here. He distributed the land in a way that people even who didn't have land, who didn't even have the right to own a land, began working and using these lands. You know, he was trying to balance the existence of different classes within the society. He is especially loved by the South Azerbaijani women because he's considered one of the early feminists, because he saw women as equal participants of a society. You know, under that one-year government, the national Azerbaijani government, women were equal participants. You know, they had the right to elect and to be elected. They had the right to work. They had one of the, I think, most fascinating laws that was passed and was being implemented throughout this national Azerbaijani government was a right that even today in the West, many women in many countries are struggling with, which is maternity leave. He gave women paid maternity leave, which in 1945 is a big deal, I'm sure, as you can guess. Women were also equally involved in military within the government itself. You know, women were involved in medicine. Women were being involved in every aspect of a society, every aspect of a government. And for this reason, as their revolution, as their national government was struck down, as their people were massacred, and all the work that they had been doing, you know, burned to ashes, quite literally, Azerbaijani people also had plenty of reason to oppose Reza Shah and to want his reign to end. So they did also play a big role, actually, in overthrowing this government and bringing about the Islamic regime. I must mention that, aware of the challenges of you know, diversity, the revolution that the Islamic regime brought acknowledged the multi-ethnic nature of the country, which Reza Shah was working so hardly to erase. So they even acknowledged this on paper in several constitutional acts, stating that the Republic would not grant any special rights to specific groups because, you know, Islam does not allow discrimination on race or ethnicity. And regarding the challenge of the language, because, you know, it's a multilingual country, they decided that while the official language would remain as Farsi and the documents would be written in Farsi, people would have the right to practice their own languages, produce in their own culture. Pishaveri's government in Azerbaijan, as I mentioned, brought this almost universal suffrage for the Azerbaijani woman. So his open support of women's rights was completely opposed when the Islamic regime took over, of course. The Islamic regime came with compulsory hijab laws for women, prohibiting them from bodily autonomy, you know, based on the laws that were put in 1979 and still continue today is, you know, women are half of a man. in a court, in any sort of public place, to oppose one man's word, you need two women witnesses to balance that, which is ridiculous, obviously. In cases of divorce, for instance, Iranian law generally grants custody of children to fathers. So even if that father does not have the financial means to take care of a child, even if that father is a drug addict, which narcotics is a big issue within Iranian society, even if that father is an abusive father, even if that father is an abusive husband, none of those generally make a difference, and the child is given to the father because men are the owners of a household, and the people who live underneath that household. A good example of this would be women need written permission from their male guardian, so either father or husband, to travel, to even obtain a passport. And all of these norms and practices collectively relegate women to a position of inferiority, and they perpetuate a notion that women are these animals who are incapable of making rational decisions regarding their own bodies, lives, futures, even children, even though it's, I think, ironic because the role of a woman is supposed to be raising children according to those Islamic ideologies. But at the same time, even when going through divorce, the child goes to a father, not to the individual that's supposed to, their only job is supposed to be to raise children. All of this came with the Islamic regime and to sort of oppose this Western power in every way, not just opposing Western politically in terms of, government structures, but also ideologically, opposing that, if women are in a certain way in the United States, in the Western world, we do not want that because that was the Shah's reign, and now we are the Islamic regime. We're fundamentalists, we're conservatives, we're Islamic, and women must be Islamic, which itself is also contradictory because there are many laws that are not found in Quran or within Islamic tradition, but somehow still made its way into Iranian politics and law. This issue, women's right to choice, was also an issue during the Pahlavi regime. And just as the Islamic regime forces, compulsory hijabs, its way of life is being forced upon the women. During the Pahlavi dynasty, a similar enforcement was happening. So maybe it wasn't that you have to cover your head or you have to, wear these modest clothing, but it was the exact opposite. So, the nomadic tribes that I was mentioning, their women were forced to open their heads, bringing forced freedom into a society that's not ready does the same thing, prohibiting them, because it's not about whether a woman chooses to wear a hijab or they don't wear a hijab. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of if I want to, I will cover my hair, and if I don't want to, I will not cover my hair. And that's one of the similarities in terms of a lack of choice that existed between the Pahlavi regime and the Islamic regime after the revolution. And similarly, discrimination and bigotry that was within the Pahlavi regime, this idea of creating a united Persian government sort of remained at the foundation of the new Islamic regime as well. They were very careful not to be as explicit, as forceful as the Pahlavi regime. As I mentioned, after the Islamic Revolution, Farsi still remained as the only official language, as the only language to be able to spoken and written. And while it was written in the constitution that, different ethnicities or different nations within Iran could have their rights, it was never enforced. It was never allowed. It was never supported. It was not, you need to be able to provide support and funding and enforce those laws for it to exist, to become alive. But unfortunately, none of that took place. One of the tactics that the Pahlavi regime started in order to create this idea of a united Persia was by erasing the names of places and regions from their ethnic names into Persian. So, name of a city, let's say, if it's Arabic or if it's Turkic or if it's Kurdish, it would be changed and it would be given a Persian name. So in a sense, they were changing the history. In a sense, they're sort of creating this utopia. That remained, that strategy continued under the Islamic revolution until today, the centralization of a government, of the lack of funding and resources for regions that are not Persian remained with the Islamic government. When you look at today's poverty rates, if you look at literacy rates, or if you look at environmental issues, which is a very big one, especially for the South Azerbaijani region, is still remain. They still are a serious problem today, because they don't have support, they don't have policy making power, they don't have the right to work on their own rights and desires, and solve their own problems. The main way that it should be looked at to the problem of women within Iran is through the idea of intersectionality that was created by Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black American woman who noticed that the problems of white women within North America is very different than the problems of Black women or women of other colors. And intersectionality is the study of overlapping and intersecting social identities. So this means that an individual has different characteristics, different identities within a society. Their identity is made up based on their sex, based on their social status, based on their race, based on their class, ability, sexual orientation, religion, even in places like India, based on their caste or based on their age. So when we look at a position of a woman, and therefore how their social and political issues are, we need to consider all of these different identities and how they intersect together to create the system of oppression, domination, and discrimination. So this is the lens that, or the perspective that we should be looking at the problems of women within Iran. So for instance, during the 2022 Women Life Freedom movement, the issue of mandatory hijab received substantial attention. It was the main issue that was brought forward and talked about. And the issue of hijab is certainly a significant one. It affects people's lives, women's lives, to a high degree. But it almost became that the issue of hijab is the only issue that women face in Iran. And it was, or that it's the utmost important, it's the most significant issue that we should be talking about, which is only an urgency for women of higher social classes. And this illustrates how different aspects of an identity can prioritize a specific issue. The issue of hijab may be a high priority issue for Persian women of higher class, but this is not as big of a priority for, let's say, women who are facing issues such as child marriage, who are facing issues such as domestic violence, to just name a few, honor killings, access to education. Environmental issues itself affect women differently. To illustrate this point, the Director General of the Clinical Examination Office of the Forensic Medicine Organization announced in 2022 that 75,000 women and children have referred to forensic medicine because of physical injuries caused by domestic violence. So, when just as an example, you're being beaten almost on a weekly basis by your husband, hijab doesn't really become a priority. It's more like your actual literal livelihood that becomes a priority. And, within South Azerbaijan in Iran, Azerbaijani women also face similar challenges in the way that while, yes, they are facing discrimination based on their gender because they are women, but they're also facing discrimination based on language, based on environment, based on culture, based on their ethnic background. For instance, if you come from a small town within South Azerbaijan and or a small village, and you are a woman who did not have the opportunity to go to school because mandatory schooling for girls is not something that the Iranian government does. It's not part of their agenda in any way. That means that your mother tongue is not Farsi. Your mother tongue, let's say, is Azerbaijani Turkish or Azerbaijani. For this reason, that means you never learned Farsi because you didn't go to school. And if you never learned Farsi, and let's say you are trying to have any sort of communication with the different organizations or with the different organs within the Iranian government, you will not have the tool of communication to communicate your demands, your problems, your issues. This language barrier is a big one for ethnic minority women, and this isn't only for the Turkic population of Azerbaijan. Arab women also face, Baluch women also face the same issue. If you are facing domestic abuse issues and you'd like to go to police for help, you won't even be able to communicate properly what the issue is because you do not speak the language. Another issue is, even if a girl from a village wants to go to school, even if their family allows them to, Iran has this gender apartheid. So there are different schools for girls and there are different schools for boys, and they're not allowed to mix. So if there is not a girls' school in a small village, then that girl does not have the opportunity to go to school. And of course, most priority is given to male schools, whether this is elementary school or high school or upper classes. All of this underscores a critical intersection between education accessibility and women's capacity to safeguard their own rights during day-to-day activities and as well as legal proceedings. Lastly, I'd like to mention that while the issues raised by the centrist higher class women are of course important. Of course, they make a difference in all of the women's. The hijab issue is an issue that all of the women within Iran face difficulties through. It affects all of their lives. But when you are being beaten up by your husband, that takes a bigger priority than whether you have to cover your hijab or not. And all of this is systematically embedded into the Iranian government structure, politics, and without a complete breakdown of the government, this system will not be dismantled. I'd like to thank you for your time and for the opportunity. I hope this makes a difference in vocalizing that the issues of women, not only in Iran, but in any geographical part of the world, is not one-dimensional. It's always multidimensional, because as human beings, as women, we have multiple dimensions to our identity, and all of those identities work together to create our position within a society.